Anybody ready to get their socks knocked off tonight?
I'm ready.
You ready?
Ready, yes, I have burdens on.
I think you're willing to let them let you
Oh man, so much happening. And I want to give, I think there's a slight delay there, right, Bob? And we've got people virtually all over the world waiting for this to go live. Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Got the hand right
That's
in
how
front of
good
your
it is.
face.
Right now.
Your screen, you got that hand in front of your face.
That's
Oh,
not
yeah.
transferring.
Oh, okay.
That's on his laptop.
All right.
Oh.
Man, pick.
That's what.
It's always something, isn't
We ask a lot from you.
it? Okay, so we'll see if anybody joins us. Hopefully they will, but we've got a good crowd here tonight. So with that, I'd like to get started. I think I mentioned last week that I wanted to start to get into the rapture tonight. And that's still my objective. But before we do that,
Don't say
I've got some things that I wanted to go over, some articles that I think are pretty intense and pretty telling in terms of what's going on, some of which is in the not too distant future. One of the things we'll talk about in a moment is the upcoming World Health Organization vote, but that may not be as bad as we thought it was going to be, and I'll just go through some information that Michelle Bachman provided in terms of what that's all about. So I got a quote here. Um, it goes all the way back to 1950. I thought it was kind of interesting from a fellow by the name of Charles Feinberg that wrote in his book entitled God Remembers, a Study of Zechariah. This was written in 1950. He wrote, the last section of the latter part of Zechariah's prophecy deals with events in the distant futures. Remember, this is 1950. Is a portion of the prophetic scriptures. It is second to none in its importance in this book or any other Old Testament book. It is indispensable to an understanding of the events of the last days for Israel. The time of the Great Tribulation in the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. In the time of our passage, all nations will be bitten by the virus of anti-Semitism. So he writes that way back in 1950, just a couple of years after Israel became a nation. Sentiment was still pretty solid in support of the Jewish people. But based on his studies of Zechariah 12 to 14, particularly, uh, he he could see exactly what we're seeing and watching unfold today. So I thought that was kind of interesting that way back in the 1950s, we could see something like that going on. So what I want to do tonight, other than hopefully get to the rapture a little bit, is to kind of bring us up to speed regarding some things that are going on in the world and how we're headed toward the one world system. Let's just take a look before we do anything at Revelation chapter 13, verses that are pretty familiar to all of us. And let's just read Revelation 13 because it's the time, and this happens at the midpoint. What we read in Revelation 13, at the midpoint of the tribulation. This is the 3.5 year mark. Antichrist has already come on the scene, but as far as Israel's concerned, he's going to be looked upon for that first 3.5 years virtually as Israel's Messiah. But they're going to realize pretty soon that that's not what he was there to do. So in chapter 13, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. So remember, this is the dragon that we read in chapter 12 is described as Satan himself, who's now cast out of heaven. And he's now standing on the shore of the sea. And sea usually is symbolizes humanity, all of the people on the earth. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea, coming up from among the nations. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horse head, and each a blasphemous name. So this is a reference to Antichrist coming out from among the nations. And one of the things we're going to see tonight is how interesting it is that there's so much going on now in terms of reestablishing the world and divided it basically into regions. And my guess is it'll ultimately be 10. So this Antichrist that we've already seen in Daniel, Antichrist will arise from or among the new 10 member nations that are basically controlling the world at that point in time. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and mouth like a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. So what we see here is that the Antichrist is going to be under the direct authority and power of Satan himself. And remember back in Second Thessalonians, we read that as we get closer to the return of Christ, there's going to be tremendous delusion, strong delusion throughout the world, so that they, primarily Israel, will believe the lie. And what's the lie? That Antichrist is the Messiah. So they'll believe that. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. So what we see here is kind of like a pseudo faux crucifixion. You know, he's to be the Messiah, just like Messiah was crucified and rose from the dead. Here, this guy's going to receive what appeared or seemed to be. It's not going to actually be a fatal wound, but I think the world will view it as a fatal wound. But it says here pretty clearly, it appears to be a fatal wound. So I think probably at some point during the midpoint of the tribulation or thereabouts, somebody's going to try an assassination attempt of some kind. So they'll have this head wound. But the fatal wound had been healed, just like Jesus rose from the dead. Antichrist will have this miraculous healing. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. So, because the Antichrist is under the direct power of Satan, they're going to worship the beast, but really what they're doing is they're worshiping Satan himself. They also worship the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? So he's going to have complete control. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. At what point? The 3.5 year mark. And, you go back through Zechariah 13 and other places, we see that that's the time when Israel is going to be under persecution unlike anything they've ever seen before. Indwelling place in those who blasphemies and exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God. He's Antichrist. He's against God. He's against Christ. So he's obviously going to speak against God. And we read about that as well in the book of Daniel. And to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. So he's got authority and he's going to wage war against the Jewish people, and he's going to have authority and control over every Gentile nation as well. So in other words, he's going to have worldwide authority. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. In other words, during the tribulation, God's people, those that accept Christ and do not take the mark of the beast, are going to be killed. many of them killed, executed, beheaded. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. So this is a reference to his second in command, which is known uh, in throughout the, it's not necessarily in the Bible. He's going to be the false prophet and some religious leader. Could be, probably very likely, could be who's ever the Pope at that particular time. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf. So he's going to be basically like the vice president, and he's going to have tremendous authority. But we get to the 17th chapter, Antichrist gets tired of him and destroys him too, because he can't have any equals. And so, but he's going to carry and he's going to have this tremendous authority for a period of time. It made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal head wound had been healed. And it performed great signs. I mean, talk about unbelievers, and they're seeing these miraculous signs where this false prophet's even to be able to cause fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of people. That's amazing power. That's going to be pretty difficult to deny and to turn away from. Because of the signs it was given, power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. And that's where we get into the false religious system. And that's why Jesus said, do not be deceived, that deception's going to be everywhere. That Satan's going to be roaring. He's going to be like a roaring lion. He's cunning. He's deceitful, and he's going to order them to set up an image in honor of the beast, and it was that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So, in other words, this image, and we find out in Matthew 24 and in Second Thessalonians that this image of Antichrist will be placed in the Holy of Holies. That's the abomination of desolation that Jesus spoke about and that the prophet Daniel related to or referred to in Daniel 9:27. Uh, it forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand and on their foreheads. So keep that in mind. So they could not buy or sell. And I'll tell you what, are we moving toward that time? That's what all this stuff that we're going to talk about is leading to. It's setting, it's we're not at the time of the beast. We're not at the mark of the beast time period yet. Because first of all, there's no beast. You can't have the mark of the beast and worship the beast unless there's a beast. So what we're seeing now with the things that we're going to look at is the stage setting for that. So we're headed toward a system where he has complete and total control. That's where AI comes in. He's going to use AI, and that's why we're seeing such an explosion of AI development. This is where the one world economy, the one world government, the one world religion, all of this is going to come into play because he has to have complete and total control. And again, what we're seeing are the elites of the world and the prophets and so forth setting the stage for this to happen. It's like J.B. Hickton refers to a Luciferian conspiracy. There's a Luciferian conspiracy going on behind the scenes. That's under the influence of Lucifer or Satan. That if we knew every detail, and we're astute enough to be able to see and read into a lot of it, but it would be quite startling. So they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which we know is on the forehead or on their right hand, so that they cannot buy or sell unless they have it, which is the name of the beast. In other words, uh, this mark will somehow identify or show that people who have this mark um, worship and are behind completely the Antichrist. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast. What's the number of man? That number is 666. So we don't know exactly what the 666 is, but I think it just symbolizes man. So God, as his number, is seven. He's the number of completion or perfection. So this number is basically in opposition to the number seven. So just wanted to go through a couple of things that we're seeing, starting with, and I have not had a chance to look at all of this, but I think, a pretty interesting video. And we're not going to watch all of it. I just want to watch the introduction. This woman right here worked for the New York Times, and she's since broken away from that. So she's got some interesting things to say. She's a guest on this program. This is probably a 50-minute presentation, but she just covers everything that we're talking about. And I don't know what her faith is. I don't know if she's a believer or not. But if you want to watch the whole thing, you just Google Financial World War Coming, Global Elites Plan. You'll own nothing and they'll own you. So that's what we're watching, just kind of come together as we speak. So I just want to listen to just a minute or two of this, just kind of an introduction, which sets the stage for some of the other things we're going to talk about.
It is the number one concern. If you want to do something that's just going to completely destroy the foundation of the United States of America, you bring in a central bank digital currency and it's just completely over. It's just the absolute most frightening thing for freedom and wealth creation. There is this change coming, and with the elite wanting to come out on top, in many ways, it's not so much that they're trying to intentionally keep you down. It's not that we have these people sitting around the table like Dr. Evil going, oh, how do we, corner the markets? But they are trying to preserve their power and their wealth. And if yours has to go away in order for that to happen, then that's just okay by them. You have to own things. They want you to own nothing. I want you to own everything.
On the Spot with Michelle McCory is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin.
Hello, I'm Michelle McCory. Thank you for joining us. A major move for the accelerated adoption of CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. The global bank messaging network, SWIFT, is planning a new platform to connect all the central bank digital currencies now in development to the existing financial system. This platform is expected to launch within the next 2 years and would be one of the most significant developments for the nascent CBDC ecosystem, given SWIFT's key role in global banking. Currently, around 90% of the world's central banks are exploring CBDCs, which are programmable digital currencies that operate as fiat currency and are controlled and issued by central banks. They can be used to monitor every single transaction, obliterating privacy and anonymity, and can be programmed to work or not work depending on the nature of that transaction. And CBDCs, according to my next guest, are a critical part of the agenda for a new financial world order. She warns that there is a great reset ahead, that we are on the precipice of a financial world war where fortunes will change and financial stakes will shift. She cautions that the global elite are jockeying to come out on top in this new order, and that in the process will leave us owning nothing and having less freedom and control over our lives. Carol Roth is a New York Times best-selling author. Her most recent book is You Will Own Nothing. Her other bestsellers include The Entrepreneur Equation and The War on Small Business. She's also a self-proclaimed recovering investment banker and an advocate for economic freedom and wealth creation. Carol, thank you for joining us. Great to have you here on Kitco.
So nice to be with you, Michelle.
So, Carol, I really enjoyed the book. As I mentioned, I love the way that it brings together various phenomena, explains the links, connect the dots, if you will. And I'll get into CBDCs, which I mentioned at the top, and digital IDs and social credit scores and how this all ties in together, and the role of big tech and the World Economic Forum. So we have a lot to unpack here. But let's start off with an overview of the coming World War F, as you call it, that you're saying is imminent.
So this all sounds very conspiratorial, doesn't it? That there's going to be a new world order, and ooh, that sounds very scary. And only the people who are crazy would say that. But if you go to the White House's website and you look at remarks that President Biden gave to the Business Roundtable, which is a group of the major business leaders here in the United States, many publicly traded companies and the like. If you go back to, I think it was March of 21, he talks about the fact that on a regular basis, things change in the financial order and says there is going to be a new world order out there, and we have got to lead that. And I'm sure the way he was talking about it was the people in the room and him, and not necessarily me or anybody who's listening here. But this is the reality that we're in. You know, we, in particularly in the United States, have been very, very blessed to live through this incredible period in history where the US has been at the center of the global financial system or the holder of the world reserve currency. And we're about 80 years into that cycle. But before us, it was the British, and before the British, it was the Dutch. And so I would imagine.
So I'll stop with that now. It's I have not listened to all of it. I just came across this about 10 minutes before I left the house, so I still have to listen to it. But I think it's very telling, and it's really, you talk about the new world order and central bank digital currencies, and she gets into digital IDs and all these other types of things, social credit scores. Talk a little bit about that's already taken place in some places, and we know it's alive and well in China. The people of this world are in for some pretty amazing changes that are going to take place, leading toward this new world order, which is ultimately going to see its fulfillment in what we just read in Revelation 13. This is why we're seeing so much. So, a couple of articles. I'll try to go through these as quickly as possible. This one's kind of long, and I'll just hit on a few of it. But I don't know if anybody knew this, but in September of this year, there's a big UN meeting taking place in New York City. And the title of this article is UN, United Nations 2.0 coming this fall, setting the stage for global government. The United Nations will meet in September for the 79th session of the UN General Assembly, as well as the highly anticipated Summit of the Future, where nations will sign the so-called, quote, Pact for the Future. The pact is expected to call for declaring a planetary emergency. Why is there going to be a planetary emergency? Because of climate change. Biden has already threatened uh, to issue a climate emergency, which would, in and of itself, give him uh, something like 130 new powers. And when I think of climate change, hopefully I can go to the right scripture. I'm reminded of Genesis chapter 10. Right. Well, it's a scripture, and I don't know exactly where it is, to be honest with you, but it's the one where it talks about God having total control over all of the earth, north, south, east, and west. God has got control over the climates. You've got control over everything, as opposed to now mankind thinking that it has to come in as the knights in shining armor and save the planet. So by the end of September, the United Nations member states may vote to radically alter the UN itself, while some are calling UN 2.0, and the very nature of how nation states make decisions regarding the future of the planet. The high-level general debate will begin on the 24th of September. Although the United Nations General Assembly is an annual meeting, this gathering will be unique because of the addition of the Summit of the Future, a UN-sponsored event taking place on the 23rd and 22nd, 23rd. It's the latest attempt by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, an affirmed communist that heads the United Nations, to, quote, rally the troops and garner more support for a rapid completion of Agenda 2030. I don't know if anybody's looked at Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the objective is to have everything in place by 2030, which is the new economy and everything else that goes along with it.
Year.
Oh,
Year.
2030.
2030. In May 2023, Gutierrez revealed that efforts to complete Agenda 2030 and the corresponding sustainable development goals were failing. Gutierrez has called for greater multilateral support for the UN development system and divisive action at the 2024 Summit of the Future. So, what we see is the UN moving off from what has historically been just kind of like a phony, if you will, organization, one that doesn't have a whole lot of power, but certainly spends an awful lot of money. But it's moving more now in cohort conjunction with the World Economic Forum and other organizations to basically become the center of this new world order that this lady just spoke about. In June of 2020, member states released a declaration that included 12 overarching commitments related to Agenda 2030 and a call for Secretary General Gutierrez to issue his own set of recommendations for achieving these goals. The declaration including statements like, quote, "We will leave no one behind, and we are determined to implement the 2030 agenda in full and on time. There is no alternative." And if you look and know what's going on behind Agenda 2030, it's a very nefarious grab of power, which is what it's all about. The report also called for a fundamental rethink of our political, economic, and social systems so that they deliver more fairly. You know, we hear all about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's driving a lot of companies virtually out of business because they have to establish and maintain DEI objectives. Finally, the report recommended a renewal of the multilateral system and stated that the Summit of the Future would be the defining moment to set new agreements for these goals. The document calls for a global financial system that works for all. And I won't go into that, pretty much speaks for itself. But I will say this. The French government stated that the objective of the gathering was to, quote, "build a new contract between the global north and south, with the north being the more affluent nations and the south being the less affluent nations, which will better equip the nations to fight poverty and, key right here, climate change." Watch climate change. That is the next elephant in the room. You know, if Biden could come through with a climate emergency, it would be just like the COVID restrictions all over again. You know, we're going to be told where to put our thermostats. We're going to be told how far we can drive. We're going to be told what we can eat, how we can. I mean, it's just a move. But climate change is nothing but a power grab. That's all it is. The summit was attended by U.S. President Joe Biden, uh, German Chancellor Scholz, British Prime Minister Sunak, Brazilian President Inácio, and Inácio da Silva. He's a full-fledged communist. He's now the guy that's running Brazil. In addition to the heads of state, the summit was organized with support from the Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros, and he is pouring money into like all these protests and doing things, everything in his power to upset the global situation as it currently stands. He is one evil son of a gun. So support from the Open Society Foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Rockefellers. You can't ever read about anything nefarious without reading about the Rockefellers. You know, and one of the Rockefellers, I forget which one it was, wrote a book several years ago. It may have been David, great son of the founding Rockefeller. But he said, "I'm often accused of being a globalist, that I want to change the world system, and I'm paraphrasing, to become a one world system under control of one government. And if that's the accusation against me, then I plead guilty. That's his objective, as is all these other people. The UN says the outcome of the pact would be a world and an international system that is better prepared to manage the challenges we face now. Right. The pact for the future is likely to be another piece of the shift toward a world government of unelected internationalist politicians. Uh, read this again, but Revelation chapter 6, when it gets to the black horse, I mean, this is a perfect picture of what's going to happen when the four horsemen are unleashed. When the Lamb, I'm in verse 5. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Now, the oil and the wine here represents the elites. In other words, it's going to be a group of people at the very highest levels. Will be, I'm sure, a gathering or coming together of government leaders. Did anybody see the portrait of King Charles? If somebody wanted to pull that up, the latest portrait of King Charles, where do you see that? Huh?
I saw it,
but I didn't take note of it.
Yeah,
Just
me
take
too.
note of it. That's the portrait of King Charles.
Oh,
I didn't see that.
I didn't see that on TV.
That's
either.
completed.
It just came out. Is that eerie or what?
Wow.
Yes.
Very.
Looks like
Blood,
blood,
doesn't
yeah.
have-
Yeah,
And that's the official.
that is right, exactly. That is the official portrait that'll hang next to all the past kings and queens.
Yep.
That is eerie, and he's the one that at a COP meeting, I think it was, or possibly I think it was a COP meeting a few years ago, talked about needing trillions and trillions of dollars for this new one world system. He is a huge globalist, a huge climate control.
Look at his hands.
Yeah, that is kind of chilling, isn't it? So,
Oh, and that's when he
Yeah.
turned around and told the other countries that you need to start pushing everybody toward this.
right,
And do
exactly.
it now.
Yeah.
That was 2 summers ago.
When was this picture?
Pardon me?
You said that picture's new.
Yeah,
That's a portrait, a
that's
painting.
the portrait that he's chosen to be hung up as his official.
Now, we're not going to make anything out of it, but it is kind of, it does make you raise an eyebrow or two, doesn't it?
I was thinking his blood. What's his connection?
Over the last couple of years, the phrase planetary emergency has become increasingly used by the United Nations. These elites are doing, like Gates and some of the others, doing everything in their power to force this climate change thing down our throats. You still see the floods and all these other things, even though climate is climate, weather is weather. But they want to make the case that it's all man-made. And if it's man-made, these changes that are going to destroy the planet, what's it? Gore, like 20 years ago, said the New York City would be underwater in like 10 years or something.
Like 10 years ago.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Years
right.
ago.
Right.
Right.
And then before that, we were going to have a global freeze, new ice age.
All the weather modifications with the sea and clouds and everything, Dubai and what's been happening here in the States.
So, I mean, it's a move. And if they can control us by implementing this planetary emergency, then they've got us. And that's just one of the many things that they're developing. White House officials have renewed discussions about potentially declaring a national climate emergency, an unprecedented step that could unlock federal powers to stifle oil development. Just what we need is more restrictions on oil. Bloomberg wrote. White House spokesman Angelo Hernandez told Bloomberg that Biden has, quote, has treated the climate crisis as an emergency since day one. However, calls for a so-called climate emergency declaration are unprecedented. It's never happened before. In recent years, UN Secretary General Gutierrez has even used the phrase climate emergency and warned that the world was approaching one or more tipping points. You know, if we don't get this under control, the world's going to come to an end. Or emergencies, which must be addressed by the UN member states. A continued failure to address the underlying causes of this emergency, such as fossil fuel based economies, resource waste overconsumption, cows, meat, other things, destruction of nature, will have further devastating effects for all of humanity, triggering potentially irreversible tipping points with dangerous consequences for planetary stability, both social and ecological. I mean, this is one serious threat. What else are we talking about here? A basic premise of the Climate Governance Commission is that new perspectives on what? Global governance, of course. But then again, we know that's what's got to happen. There's got to be a new one world system. And it's just amazing to me when we just got done talking about how Ezekiel 38 and 39 are coming together, how anti-Semitism is exploding, and how all these things are taking place. And now we've got this move to create this new world order. Obviously, it's been going on for some time, but it's really gaining some traction now. Such efforts should complement and enhance ongoing intergovernmental negotiations. Inter now, but soon to become intra, one government. By our prioritizing fundamental global collective action and innovations, we can protect our common home for present and future generations in a just, equitable, and sustainable manner. In the sake of near-term international government innovations, we therefore urge the UN General Assembly and at the 2024 Summit of the Future to declare a planetary emergency, recognizing that the triple planetary crisis poses a grave risk to global security and stability. And so they go on and on and on about things. And then planetary boundaries, which I won't even get into, but so many other parts of it. All roads lead to the Club of Rome. And eugenics. What eugenics is voluntary. I mean, you have a right to die. And so we're going to allow you to take your own life if circumstances demand it. But at what point does it become a right to die? Does it become a duty to die? Once that camel, the nose of the camel's in the tent. We can all trace the planetary emergency back to the infamous but obscure group Club of Rome. And then it goes on and on. And the Club of Rome and the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations and all these different groups, the Rockefeller groups, the Gates Foundation, all of these groups are in cohorts and coming together to develop this new world system. So it's a pretty long article. There's a lot more to it. Talking in here about population reduction. That's one of their goals. We have to reduce the population, which is why we're seeing so many things taking place. Okay, tyranny. We talked about tyranny. We talked about Justin Trudeau last week, leader of Canada. So a little bit more on this new legislation that's been passed in Canada. Justin Trudeau creates blueprint for dystopian future in Canada. So we're seeing this all around the world, all these different elements that are coming together. On February 21st, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gave a press conference in Edmonton announcing his government's decision to introduce the Online Harms Act. It was described in Canadian media as, quote, a bill to protect kids that would stop the, quote, exploitation of children. And Trudeau's curt speech focused solely on minors. The scarf-clad Prime Minister angrily dismissed criticism of that the bill might have a broader focus. Quote, I look forward to putting forward the online harms bill, which people will see is very, very specifically focused on protecting kids and not censoring the internet, he said sharply. Soon after, on February 26, Trudeau's government introduced the bill. Canada's stable of retreating, credulous on-air personalities announced its rollout like the arrival of penicillin. Tonight, Web of Harm, Gush CTV's Omar Sakadia, tackling online dangers and safeguarding children, the long-awaited framework for protecting the vulnerable. Then the people read the bill. It's wild. Trudeau was lying when he said it was a very, very specifically focused bill on correcting kids. The purview of the Online Harms Act extends far beyond speech, reimagining society as a mandated social engineering project, creating transformational new procedures that would, one, enlist Canada's citizens in an ambitious social monitoring system with rewards up to $20,000 for anonymous informants of hateful behavior, with the guilty paying penalties up to $50,000, creating a self-funded national spying system. Introduce extraordinary criminal penalties, including life in prison, not just for existing crimes like advocating genocide, but for any offense motivated by hatred. You know, Christianity is going to become hate speech, and it's going to be something that people will be arrested for at some point in time. Uh, what if an informant convinces a judge you, quote, will commit a hate offense? You can be jailed up for a year if they determine that you might or you will. Put under house arrest, have your firearms seized, or be forced into drug and alcohol testing, all for things you haven't done. Penalize past statements. The law gets around prohibitions against retroactive punishment by calling the offense, quote, continuous communication of hate. So, in other words, things that just, we mentioned this last week that you might have said 10, 20 years ago would be good. Force corporate international platforms to remove harmful, uh, virtually on demand within 24 hours in some case, the hammer being fines of up to 6% of gross revenue. So if they say you've got to take this down, you have 24 hours to do it. If you don't, you could be fined 6% of your gross revenue. Things you're saying, things you've already said, things that administrative judge thinks you might say are all barred, with neighbors deputized as enforcers. Good times. Leave it to Trudeau, a frequent trailblazer in new forms of illiberalism in the digital age, to come up with this quantum leap downward on the rights front. And it goes on and on and on. There's a long backstory of important recent laws and Supreme Court cases that help push Canada down a path toward this bill. But the bill still stands apart as a unique problem, and only a few domestic media outlets have been willing or able to criticize it. Why would they? Why would anybody criticize it? Could that be deemed as hate speech and subject to fine and penalties? It involves new provisions for life imprisonment for speech offenses. There are really two. Quote, advocating genocide is already a crime in Canada, but this boosts its maximum penalty from 5 years to life. Life sentences for sending out some words. That's heavy. Canada's former Supreme Court Chief Justice told so-and-so. Andrea McLean of the Calgary-based JSS Barristers, which are lawyers, is among the lawyers who don't necessarily foresee an avalanche of life sentences, but does worry the draconian life sentences provision might have serious downstream effects. In other words, nobody's going to be willing to say anything. And so we've got the implementation of tyranny. And, you know, it was Biden who tried to implement this Office of Disinformation. remember, and brought in this lady who testified before either the House or the Senate, and she was summarily, she was not allowed to go through. But that was this new position they wanted to implement, was the Office of quote dis and misinformation. So along the same lines.
I heard recently they gave her a different job in another department.
Did
She
they?
didn't get terminated or anything. Just didn't get the job Biden wanted to give her.
So it's not just Canada, it's not just the United States. Here's an article that came out in April. Scotland's transgender hate crime law already showing how it leads to tyranny. Scotland's new hate crime law already is demonstrating how it will be used to squash dissent and free speech. The so-called Hate Crime and Public Order Act, which went into force in Scotland on April Fool's Day, adds age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, and transgender identity to a list of protected classes. The law provides for various potential punishments, including jail time. The new law has been fiercely criticized by author J.K. Rowling, creator of the Harry Potter series, and many others who rightly see it as an attack on freedom of speech. Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf said the bill is a quote about protecting people from a rising tide of hatred. But who will protect the people's God given right to free speech? And I'll just finish with this. There's a lot more to this article as well. But Scottish police reported Scottish police reportedly, quote, received more than 7,000 online reports of offenses in the first week since the introduction of this new hate law. Police have called the law an unsustainable burden on their force. Frankly, I am more concerned with the burden this law and ones like it are placing on the fraying threads holding up the fleeing notion that those living under such measures really live in a free society. And so just one more thing. All these things are going to backfire. But you can see how all of these things are just coming together, moving toward this one world system.
One day, Rockefeller, there was a book called Memories of David Rockefeller. It talked about both families going against banks, going against the United States. And in there, he was blatant enough to say, you can't stop it already in the
Yeah, the Rockefellers are behind so many nefarious things.
But if you get that book and read it, it
Yeah.
will open your eyes. It was written maybe 15 years ago.
I believe it. Here's another one real quick, and I won't spend much time, but cashless society soon. 98% of central banks are adopting digital currency. Not only that, but I just read there's a lady out there that I listen to all the time. Her name is Lena Petrova, Petrova. And she's a young lady. I'm not sure about her beliefs, but she's absolutely brilliant. She's an economist. She's I don't know what her political stance is, but I think she's very conservative. And I'm not even sure I think she lives in the United States, but she has a foreign accent.
So
And she does,
about it.
I just found it on the internet. Lena,
Under the title,
yeah, just look for Lena Petrova.
but before you knew her, what title did you look for?
I don't know how it's been a couple of years.
Thank
I don't
you.
remember.
Okay.
I don't remember how I found Petrova. Petrova. And the nice thing is you can put it on closed caption and read it. You don't have to listen, and you can stop it. And I like to stop it and write down notes. I've got tons of things that she's done. She does 2 or 3 a week. She just did one that I just listened to today. It's a very short. Most of them are like 20 minutes. And they're very topical. It's on central bank digital currency, anything relating to the economic issues worldwide. She's involved in, but she just did one, and I was shocked to hear that in the first quarter of 2024, China dumped $58 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries, and I think it was one of the one of the nations, I forget which one, but another nation dumped another 20 billion. So, and she points out that that who would invest in a 1-year U.S. Treasury, let alone one that's 10 or 30, that with the level that they're never going to get paid. And so our status as the reserve currency, and having the reserve currency is going away. And these nations are all, except Japan's not doing it so much, but all these other nations are beginning to dump these dollars. And she also did one with a guest that she had last week, which I thought was kind of hard to understand, I have to admit. And but the topic was hegemony, and how hegemony means like a particular government is like number one in terms of economy and military strength and so forth. And the United States has had that position as being the one of hegemony for years, but that is beginning to come apart and is being replaced with what they call a multipolar system, which means different groups of nations. If that's not Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Revelation 13, I don't know what is. But our position as having the most influence and the hegemony, if you will, over the world is deteriorating very rapidly. And she had this fellow on from, I think he was from Belgium, and a very interesting discussion.
Hey, Bob,
So-
before we get too late to be able to bring it up, do you have any thoughts on the helicopter crash? With the Romanian guys?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I don't think anybody's sad about it. I hate to say that.
The UN stood up and.
Yeah, no,
that
I don't think Israel had anything to do with it.
no.
I think it was just it was an accident, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not even accusing Israel. So it's probably the most evil man. He's responsible for so many executions, and he's probably one of the 5 most evil men in the world. But they do say that his replacement will be just as bad. So don't think that things are going to get better for Iran. So, I think about people like that, that he's going along, he's got all what he thinks is power and this, that, and the other thing. As soon as that helicopter hit that ground, what do you think happened? He was face to face with Jesus Christ. Can you imagine the shock?
It was a Christian.
And, I was like, I never knew you.
Here's the guy, he said, as soon as he hit the ground, he found out that there weren't 72.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they referred to him as a martyr.
Yeah, he did. Right
Yeah.
then, yeah.
All of them, right?
Yeah.
Don't you think, I mean, elections are coming up in 40 days. Maybe the Ayatollah didn't like him that much.
I don't, who knows?
You
Who
don't know.
knows?
It's hard to-
Who knows?
Wow, the world's really bad.
And getting worse.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I make a comment? Well, you mentioned a minute ago about was it $58 billion to China sold US dollar? That's one of the scariest things I've heard in a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because hyperinflation is a word that we've, I think, all used, but I'm not sure that everyone really understands what it is. Hyperinflation is not just inflation slowly getting worse and worse and worse. Hyperinflation happens like, seconds or minutes. And what will start hyperinflation will be something like that. A country or someone with enough US dollars to sell them in today's world that's done electronically over the internet quickly.
Right.
I mean, it would all, it's a press of a button, right? The country says, I want to sell them and trade them for
Right.
gold or something different.
And that's exactly what they did.
And what happens
Starting
with hyperinflation is if it's a big enough number, apparently 58 billion wasn't a big enough number. It's a big enough number. Others, like India and other countries, and maybe those, I don't know, let's say Elon Musk, who's worth a lot of money. Okay, people with an awful lot of money, but probably countries, will follow that, not wanting to get stuck holding the bag.
Exactly. And that's
worthless dollars. So
that
they're
is-
going to want to sell theirs too.
exactly.
And because of the internet, this can happen within a matter of seconds.
Right.
or 5 minutes, and boom, suddenly the dollar is worth nothing.
Yeah. I think what we need to bear in mind, if you go through the Bible, and we've talked about this over and over again, there's no reference to the United States. We're not there. I'm convinced that, well, there's a lot of different things. Like, I don't know if you heard about the cyber attacks on our water systems.
Yeah, I heard
Uh,
about that.
yeah, I don't fully understand that, but I don't know who the actors were that did. Did you hear who did it? No.
I heard that either 70 or 90% of the water systems do not meet federal standards for cyber protected systems.
Yeah, right.
I forgot. I didn't hear if it was 70 or I heard the number,
Like
but I
11
didn't hear
months
it.
from now, and they're not gonna be,
Right.
they just ignored it.
Yeah. So imagine if our water supplies were affected, or, we've got, these fires that took place in Texas. You may have heard of, I remember a couple of months ago, and I think it was in the number one cattle where they raise more cattle in this particular area than any other place in the country. Just killed off a tremendous number tremendous numbers of the herd, members of the herd. So it's just everything that's happening, but there's no mention of the United States. And I'll tell you, if it's not our debt that'll get us, it's the fact that we're no longer the leader. I mean, who trusts us now? I mean, one of the things that's happened is that the United States entered into an agreement back in '73 with Kissinger with Saudi Arabia, where we agreed to protect Saudi Arabia militarily if, in exchange for that, they agreed to sell and trade their oil in dollars. Well, what happened with the first year Biden's administration, with Afghanistan? Saudi Arabia begins to think we can't rely on the United States. So now they say they're now a member of BRICS, even though there's all this talk about the United States implementing a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia and all this other kind of stuff, which I think is just a lot of talk. I mean, it may happen, but it doesn't mean anything. But they're now willing to sell oil to China for the yuan, for the digital yuan, and Russia. So it's just everything. If the economy's going to collapse, it has to. It has to. I'm not saying it's going to be tomorrow or the next day, but it cannot possibly survive. And here's an article, real quick. Another cheerful article. Consumers feel the economic shift. Uncertain outlook for the rest of 2024. And this is dated May 2nd. I'm not going to go through it, but can you feel it too? Over the past few weeks, I've heard from so many readers that are deeply troubled about economic conditions where they live. We all see it. It's there. I mean, gas prices could explode overnight, you know?
40 cents in the last 3 weeks when I talked about it.
Yeah,
What are 40 cents a gallon? I mean, give me a break.
right. There was a lady, Shirley and I were watching the news last night, and this lady had a bag of white grapes. But this picture says I paid $6 for these.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Other than the early stages of the pandemic, we haven't seen anything like this since 2008 and 9. Here's just a quick quote from a reader for this particular guy from Seattle, and I'll just read this. I live in the tech corridor outside of Seattle, and practically no one can find a job in tech. Apparently, the costs of AI processors and servers are so expensive that large tech companies, it's just one other element on top of everything else, are laying off workers to accommodate for the increased infrastructure costs. I would estimate that 50% of the people I know in tech are unemployed, including myself and my spouse. In addition, they are laying off both FTEs, full-time employees, and contractors and not backfilling the positions. The problem is exacerbated if you're over 40 because they don't want to compensate for experience. In fact, experience seems to be working against people, not to mention AI taking over roles like technical writing and marketing communications. It's getting really bad out there, and large companies play along with the media. You can't I mean, don't listen to the media. I mean, it's just lie after lie after lie. I've met with several ex-colleagues who have had their entire teams laid off and former full-time employees who have had to take major pay cuts as contractors. I've also heard of more rounds of layoffs coming up. I went over to Microsoft the other morning to have coffee with an ex-colleague, and it's a ghost town. No one in conference rooms or offices. Maybe people are working from home, but it sure felt very different. So this is just symptomatic of everything that's going on. Right. I won't read any more. Um, we are going to get into the rapture. I think we've got about 5 minutes to kick it off.
Great. Oh yeah. 5 minutes.
And I promise next week we'll spend more time. But it's just so much coming together. And the point is that this is kind of like Tom Hughes's weekly thing where it's titled "You Can't Make This Stuff Up." You can't make this stuff up. It's just all happening.
Why does the Trump trial?
Huh?
Just watch the Trump trial.
Oh yeah. And today the judge wouldn't allow an expert to testify.
Oh, we didn't?
Yeah. No, he's a hack.
He called them the Rolls Royce of experts.
Right.
It
Right.
was the former head of the election, what is it, Federal Election Committee? He
Yeah.
knew apparently extremely complex law.
Right.
This guy knew it inside and out, and the judge wouldn't let him
Right.
testify.
All right. So the rapture. Now, as we go through and we study the rapture, everybody knows what the rapture is. Janet, you're up in the rapture. Everybody knows what the rapture is. The sudden catching up, the gathering in the clouds of all the believers, dead and alive, in a twinkling of an eye. We're going to let the Bible speak for itself. We're going to let the plain sense speak for itself. We're not going to allegorize. We're not going to spiritualize. We're just going to let the Bible speak for itself. And I think if we do that, if we read the Bible literally, we're going to come to the conclusion that not only is there a rapture, and people, nobody disputes the fact that there's going to be a rapture, pre, post, mid, pre-wrath, whatever it might be. Everybody knows there's going to be a rapture. The big question is when. But if we read the scriptures literally, we're going to come to the conclusion, I think, that it's pre-tribulation. It happens before the tribulation, and we'll take the position, one of the arguments to a pre-wrath or a mid-trib tribulation rapture is that not all of the tribulation is the wrath. But we'll take the position, we'll see pretty clearly that the entire 7 years is the wrath of God. It is Jesus wrath, the wrath of the Lamb, as we read about as early as Revelation chapter 6. So, what we're seeing is that the rapture definitely precedes the wrath of God, the tribulation. God's going to allow the tribulation. He's going to use the tribulation through the antichrist. Don't forget, God's allowing this to happen to judge and separate the entire world. So to get into the tribulation, of course, we're gone. We're not part of it. But the tribulation is going to, for one of the purposes, is to judge unrepentant sin. And that'll be determined by whether or not people take the mark of the beast for the most part. Then he's also going to allow the Antichrist to come on the scene because he's the great separator. Every person on earth will either be aligned with the Antichrist and have the mark of the beast, or be aligned with God and have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. So that's during the tribulation. So if you think about it, pre-tribulation rapture is a necessary event that we've got to endorse or engage or understand and accept the rapture for two reasons. Number one, the Bible clearly states that the church is not subject to go through the wrath of God. It's not going to go through the tribulation. The other thing is, we'll just finish with this. If we go to, first of all, along those lines, let's just take a look at Revelation 3:10. This relates to the church. This is a very strong, powerful, pre-wrath rapture verse where it says, Revelation 3:10, since this is Jesus communicating to the church of Philadelphia. He's writing to the seven churches and speaking through John to the seven churches, and in his message to the church at Philadelphia, which is, call it an evangelical, spirit-filled, Bible-believing church. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will keep you from. So if you're going to be kept from, you have to be kept out of it, not through it, not in it, but you're going to be kept from it. You have to be removed in order to be kept from it. So, in other words, we also know that, and we've said this many times, the Greek word there is ek, which literally means out of. So, this could say, and would say in the original Greek, I will keep you out of the hour of trial. That's the tribulation that's going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. So he's talking to the church of Philadelphia and telling them that because they've kept his command, which is they're evangelical, they've accepted Christ, they're spirit filled, they believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, the Trinity, etc. They're going to be kept out of it. There's no reason for them to go through it. And the second reason, and let's just go back real quick to Daniel chapter 9. I just want to go through two more real quick. Daniel 9, verse 27, or Daniel 9, verse 24. This is, we've been through the whole 70-week period of Daniel 70 weeks, but 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish transgressions, to put an end to sin, to atone for weakness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So, in other words, we know that 69 of those 70 weeks have already transpired, have taken place. We're waiting for that 7-year period to take place, and that is the tribulation. And notice who it's for. It's not for the church, it's for the Jewish people, it's for Israel. And then if we look, and I won't do it right now, but in Jeremiah, let's just Jeremiah 30 real quick. We'll finish with this, I promise. 37. Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7. How awful that day will be. This is referring to the tribulation as well. No other will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. Jacob being Israel. It's the time of Israel's trouble. So the tribulation is not about the church. It's about Israel. So we have a two-pronged approach here. He's going to judge unrepentant sin. Those earth dwellers, as we read in the King James Version, will be subject to persecution and judgment, but it's primarily the time when he's going to reveal himself to Israel, fulfill the promises made to Israel. You go through the tribulation, you go through Revelation, it's really all about Israel. There's no need for the church to be present. The church being where we are right now. We're in the church age. So we'll expand on that next week, and a lot more to come on the rapture. So that's
I was sweating, Bob. Down to the wire here.
so. Comments, questions?
So in the tribulation, it's for the Jewish people to come to, so they're believing the Messiah, which is Jesus.
Correct.
And other people, or just the Jewish people?
No, the Bible says that there's the tribulation is going to be a time of revival, probably unlike any other.
For
Because
non-believers.
For non-belief, yeah. See, what's going to happen?
That's their last chance.
That's it. Yeah. If they take the mark, that's it. They're done.
Yeah.
There's no chance for salvation. But in Revelation 7, we read that people will come to Christ, I'm paraphrasing, from every tongue, nation, peoples, and tribe. That means Gentiles. There's will be tons of Gentiles. But the penalty for them is probably execution. or trying to stay one step ahead of the antichrist. We're not appointed to go through that. People, Jesus is always going to have a remnant, but we're not going through what is going to be the most horrific time in history. And then, particularly the second half of tribulation, is really all about Israel. When they, the Jews, will cry out to him. As the one cries out to him, don't listen.
Find it interesting. Maybe I'm late to the game, but lately on YouTube, I've been noticing a lot of YouTube videos stating that proof that the rapture is a big lie. I mean, things are, this is all part of this.
Yeah, deception.
Yeah. I won't. I got a lot of years behind me, more than ahead of me, and I don't want to waste my time watching these videos. So I didn't actually watch them, but I mean, just the title tells you something.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't do anything.
yeah. But there's going to be, we're going to see next week that
Yes, they will.
one of the arguments against the rapture is that people like Hank Hanegraaff and others say, well, there's no mention of the rapture until the 1800s when John Darby came on the scene. Which is all a lie. But we're going to see very clearly quotes from Ignatius and out of writings that are right around the time of John's last decades, and many, many, many ancient writers who spoke about the rapture. Paul talked about the rapture. He thought he was going to go. So, yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. And it's our hope. What's the hope? If what are they saying their hope is? To go through and get their heads chopped off?
The thing is, it's either you have the faith or you don't. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a God-given gift that
Right.
that you choose. That you choose, right? It's a gift. So
Plus, Jesus
if they don't
said
have
it's
it,
finished.
they're going to be persuaded. Right. They don't know the truth.
Right.
Plus, Jesus said it's finished.
Mhm.
He died for us. It's finished. And none of us are perfect.
Right.
Unless somebody can walk on water.
Yep.
But
Everything you said about the CBDCs and Agenda 2030 made me realize we're not like 1.5 presidential cycles away from 2030.
Right. It's very
A little
close.
over 1.5 cycles away.
Yeah.
Made me realize that, I mean, I've always known this, but even more so, how important a change in leadership is at the next presidential election.
Look at what Biden.
And that makes me realize something even maybe more startling, which is that they're not going to take that sitting down. No. There's probably going to be some kind of a black swan event in the next few months.
Yeah.
Because it looks like they're going to lose the election. Right. So they're going to do something.
They can't lose.
But we always have to keep in mind the Lord's in charge.
Exactly. Yeah.
For that reason, I don't worry. I don't
I
sweat.
know,
really don't.
and that is the
And I cannot
piece
explain
of
that
all.
anyway, except for faith in God.
Yeah.
because we know
That's the only way I
something's
can
going to
explain
happen,
Yeah.
and maybe not. We don't know when, but
Yeah, and I
we
think
know
I,
the Lord's in charge.
both of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I'm happy.
Well, you can be happy, but for the most part, most people are not happy with either one. They were talking about that on TIC radio. They said we need more choices today.
Yep. All right, let's just close in prayer. Father, we just thank you, Lord, and it's amazing that so much is going on. And what it does, Lord, is it proves to us in no uncertain terms that, as Pastor Rob was talking about the other day, that Jesus, you are the truth. There is no other truth. And your truth is revealed to us in the Bible. And we have the evidence of prophecy, fulfilled prophecy, that helps us to come to grips with the fact that this is a divine work. We're all Bible purists here. We take the plain meaning and just take it no further. And we just thank you, Lord, for your word. And I just pray for everyone here tonight, Lord, that you bring us back next week, safe and sound, and just look forward to further looking into your just amazing plan. In Jesus' name, amen.